Julian Cruz, who was inside the courtroom when that sentence was handed down. Your impressions, Julian?
Well, hey, guys, characteristically, Michael Madigan not showing a lot of emotion outwardly. At least we couldn't see much. Listening to the judge as he went through point by point the reasons why he was going to impose a jail sentence of 90 months, 7.5 years in prison with supervised release. Madigan, as he's known as the Velvet Hammer, always keeping his composure, and he was true to form. After the sentence was delivered, he didn't go to his family immediately. He went and conferred with his lawyers and talking about what the judge had just handed down. And only after maybe 5 or 6 minutes of talking to his lawyers, went over and hugged his children, his 3 biological children. His adopted daughter, Lisa Madigan, was not in the courtroom as far as we could see. His wife, Shirley, with some health problems, not in the court either. But earlier, before the sentence came down, Judge Blakey, it was really a moment of drama when he talked about that he could possibly, with all of the enhancements on each of the 10 criminal counts, that he could have handed down a prison term in excess of 100 years. And when he said that, 105 years, it wasn't a gasp, but you could hear people kind of lose their breath a little bit in the courtroom. You know, I guess for a moment there, people wondering, well, what's he talking about? You know, because obviously prosecutors are talking about 12.5 years in prison, a $1.5 million sentence. He was just saying, the judge was just saying that potentially he could have, with all of the enhancements, gone with that kind of a sentence. So that kind of took everybody's breath away. And then he asked Madigan if there was anything that he wanted to say. His lawyers stepped in and asked for a quick break for about 10 minutes. They returned, and then, of course, Mike Madigan talked to the judge, as you've heard already, some details about it, that basically he was sorry for putting the people of Illinois through this, and that he did his best. But it was a very dramatic moment in the courtroom, guys, but true to form, Michael Madigan, the Sphinx, as he's been called before, not showing a lot of emotion.
Breaking news from CBS News Chicago.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us on the stream. We are here to update you on breaking news happening this afternoon in the case against Mike Madigan.
Yes, at this hour, the former Illinois House Speaker is in court. He is awaiting his sentencing as we speak. And CBS News Chicago cameras were there when Madigan walked into the Dirksen Federal Building. You're watching some of this right now. The hearing started about an hour into what could last the rest of the afternoon.
The 83-year-old was convicted back in February on 10 felony counts, including bribery, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Jurors acquitted him on 7 counts, and they were deadlocked on 6.
The government argued Madigan's abuse of power damaged public trust and that he has expressed no remorse for his crimes. Madigan's defense team called him a remarkable public servant and asked the judge to sentence him to 5 years probation, along with community service and a, quote, reasonable fine.
But according to our legal analyst, Irv Miller, probation is not on the table. Instead, several months behind bars. We want to go to Irv Miller. He is watching this unfold this afternoon at the Dirksen Federal Building. Irv, we hear things are going pretty slow at the moment.
To say the least. You know, when lawyers start talking, they like to hear themselves keep going on, and that's what's going on. They're all taking advantage of their time in front of the judge today.
What is the point of this process today, Irv? Are the lawyers doing all they can to try to impact the ultimate sentence here?
We are at a preliminary point in a sentencing hearing in federal court. We have to first determine what the guidelines are for the judge to use in order to impose a sentence. The defense obviously wants a low guideline number. The prosecution wants a high guideline number. And they're fighting over some minor points with respect to the ultimate sentence. The first thing they're arguing about is whether or not the former speaker lied when he took the witness stand. Because if the judge determined that he lied, that's obstructing justice, and that makes the guidelines go up. The other thing they're talking about is whether or not there was a multi-million dollar, like $400 million lost to ComEd based on the bribery. The defense is arguing that they can't really figure it out. It's too speculative. But the government is saying, yeah, it's $400 million. That adds on many, many years to the sentence, ultimately, if in fact the judge accepts the government's argument.
Irv, I was curious, as they were talking about money, we have a reporter in the courtroom who's taking some notes for us, so we know more about the conversation happening in there. But would that play into the decision about a possible fee at all? Because I know that Madigan may be required as part of his sentence to pay some kind of fee.
They're not looking for a forfeiture, which was originally part of the trial. About a month ago, the government decided not to proceed on the forfeiture counts. But there is a question of a fine as opposed to any particular jail sentence. And the government's asking for $1.5 million fine.
Right.
And the defense obviously wants nothing to do with that.
You mentioned the guidelines, Irv. I'm curious about how they might shift because the government asked for 12 and a half years. Do you think, depending on how these arguments go this afternoon, they might ask for more? That's what you're saying?
Well, no, they're not going to ask for more. Actually, the guidelines as laid out by the government calls for a life sentence, not 12.5 years. What they're saying, yeah, we don't, even though the guidelines say life, we don't think that's appropriate. First of all, the maximum sentence is 20 years. So the guidelines exceed the maximum penalty. So that's why, frankly, these guidelines tend to be irrelevant. But what they do is they let you get an insight into what the judge is thinking about whether or not he's going to be lenient as far as sentencing or whether he's going to throw the book at Speaker Madigan. And I have to say, just by the tone of the judge's statements regarding the amount of loss to ComEd, I think he's leaning towards throwing the book at them. And I don't think leniency is going to be a part of it.
Wow, interesting. So they are, let's just say, in the weeds right now about some of these details, still wading through a lot of it. Do we know, Irv, possibly how much time that could continue to take? And I'm curious if we know if there are any speakers that are planning to say something in court prior to the ultimate sentencing.
That hasn't even been discussed yet. We're still in the preliminary guidelines stage. We're not really at the, you would call a typical aggravation and mitigation sentencing hearing. That's yet to come after the judge decides what the guideline sentences are. Like I said earlier, whether or not the judge finds that the speaker was lying when he took the stand. And an interesting question that the judge asked the speaker's lawyers is your client still saying that even though he was found guilty, he's still maintaining his innocence? That's not a good sign for what's coming later on.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously the judge is not too happy. The defendant saying, hey, I don't care about the jury's verdict. I am an innocent man. And it was interesting the judge asked that question.
All right, Irv, thank you very much. We're going to be in touch, and that is our coverage for now anyway, but we're going to have live coverage across all of our platforms here on CBS News Chicago throughout the afternoon, and we'll certainly let you know when we do get a sentence.
In the meantime, we'll see you back on TV today at 4.
Today marks a historic turn in Illinois politics. Former House Speaker Mike Madigan, once considered the most powerful man in the state, will be sentenced in federal court.
Prosecutors call his conviction one of the most significant public corruption cases in Illinois history. Let's get to Darius Johnson. He's live at the Dirksen Federal Building. That is where the sentencing is expected to happen this afternoon. Darius, good morning.
Hey there, good morning, Dana and Chris. Mike Madigan led the Illinois House for nearly 40 years and spent 50 years in Springfield. But he now nears the end of a years-long criminal probe and trial that prosecutors hope deters corrupt Illinois politicians that Illinois has become known for. And his sentencing today marks the end of an era for a man who was once simply known as chairman. Now, the government is seeking a 12.5-year sentence, arguing Madigan's abuse of power damaged public trust. The 83-year-old was convicted in February on 10 felony counts, including bribery, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Jurors acquitted him on 7 counts and deadlocked on 6. The case centered on Madigan's ties to ComEd, who allegedly provided jobs and contracts to his allies in exchange for favorable legislation. Prosecutors call it a decade-long scheme rooted in no-work jobs and kickbacks. Federal prosecutors say Madigan built a political machine trading power for personal gain. Back out here live this morning, his defense is really working to try to minimize minimize his sentencing, pushing for probation, citing his age, his health, and also his role as caregiver to his wife as well. They've even submitted 200 letters of support from constituents, nonprofits, and even local leaders around the state who consider Madigan as a public servant. Meanwhile, regardless of those letters, regardless of this push, Madigan will still make his way back here to the Dirksen Federal Courthouse at sometime this afternoon for a sentencing that is expected to happen at 1. Of course, we will be inside. We will bring that sentencing to you live as soon as it happens. For now, we're live in the loop at the Dirksen Federal Building. I'm Darius Johnson, CBS News, Chicago.
Darius, thanks so much. And the question this morning is, how much time could Madigan spend behind bars? To answer that and so many other questions on this big day, we bring in CBS News legal analyst Irv Miller.
Irv, good morning to you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Let's just get right to it. I know that federal prosecutors are asking for 12 and a half years. Mike Madigan's defense attorneys want probation. We've seen, other federal convictions play out very differently when it comes to sentencing. For instance, for Governor George Ryan, about 6 years. Former Governor Rod Blagojevich, 14 years. How do you see this playing out?
When the government asked for 12 and a half, I thought that was very unrealistic. When the defense asked for basically probation and 1 year of home confinement, I thought that was very unrealistic. I don't think the judge is going to go to either of those extremes. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. Judge has to follow and use sentencing guidelines as an advisory guideline, but he's going to come up with a number that he thinks is appropriate based upon the facts of the case, the deterrence factor, and also has to take into account the age and the circumstances currently with regard to former Speaker Madigan.
And last year, Irv, we were at the Ed Burke trial, you and I, down in the bullpen there at Dirksen Federal. And of course, at that point in time, the judge sentenced him to 2 years. He had a bevy of letters from people all over the community trying to speak on his behalf that kind of his team hoped knocked down. And in a respect, you got a pretty good number too. Do we expect to see that same kind of blueprint at play today?
It worked for former Alderman Burke. It really did.
Yeah.
It really lowered what everyone, including myself, thought would be the appropriate sentence in the case. I even thought that 2 years was appropriate after reading all his mitigation.
Right.
There were 240 letters submitted to the judge for the sentencing hearing today. I have to say that there was quantity, but didn't come near the quality of the letters that were submitted for Alderman Burke. But I do think it will have an effect on the judge, that all these political folks, particularly ones that were on the other side of the aisle, had respect for him about his ability to make a statement and stick to it. He was honest with them, but that doesn't mean that he's going to get a lot off because of the serious nature of the convictions.
To that point, what do you think the impact of, I'm sure you've seen it, but his Mike Madigan's wife, Shirley, made a video. It was released publicly this week where she talked about how she relies on him for her care. She doesn't know what she would do without Mike, without him. She might have to seek care. Didn't mention the children and how they would help. Do you think that will appear to be sympathetic? Or will a judge look at that sympathetically, or could that backfire?
I think both. I think that because of the wife's situation, the judge will take that into account. But in the government submission to rebut that fact, that video, they said the Madigan family is in a unique position that they could really afford the best help in the world to take care of his wife if he, in fact, is sentenced to the penitentiary. So I think it went both ways.
We'll learn much more early this afternoon. Irv, as always, thanks so much. We'll talk to you throughout the morning, and you'll know the first thing we know because Irv is going to be in the courtroom tracking it for us, and we'll have him with us throughout the day. I want to continue this conversation. We're joined by Pat Brady, former federal prosecutor, also chaired the Illinois Republican Party until 2012. Pat, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Morning, guys. It's early.
It is early.
Yeah, it is early.
I'm usually just getting home now.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, Pat, you have been, you haven't had an eye on state politics for a really long time, and you still do. In your opinion, given the fact that prosecutors are asking for 12-and-a-half-year prison sentence, and, we've had a lot of political convictions over the past 25, 30 years, and the sentences have varied, what do you think is a fair conviction, considering all of the past.
Well, it's more, I think it's more what the judge thinks is fair. And I'm guessing, I read all the sentencing memos and very familiar with the facts. I think he'll probably get about 4. He's not going to get probation, but he's not going to get 12 and a half. And the big determining factor was the loss amount. And they're still debating that because it's tough to calculate the loss amount, which kind of dictates what the sentence might be. But having, read all the filings, the prosecution actually lays out their case better than I've seen them before, tying Madigan to the actual legislative action that I think people wondered, what was the quid pro quo? It's pretty clear from the sentencing memo. And then on the other side, you read through, and he has some fantastic attorneys representing him. It's just not very sympathetic. And he never really accepts responsibility, which is one of the things the judge is going to look for. Everybody, even Rod Blagojevich, had to do a mea culpa at sentencing day. Now, Madigan's going to have an
I was there, if I may, on his sentencing day. I'm not sure you'd call it a mea culpa.
Well, as close as he's going to get.
Okay.
But it's more than Madigan's done. And he'll have a chance. That'll be what will be so fascinating about today's hearing, to see what Madigan actually says, because he's not a type of guy that's used to having to say that. And it's very, it's going to be fun to watch.
The fact that we have so many examples to pull from, Blagojevich and Ryan and Ed Burke last year, the message obviously from federal prosecutors is we're trying to snuff out public corruption. Do we think we're getting to the meat of this at all? Is the signal being sent? Is it still going on as robustly as it has for decades?
I don't know if it is or not, but I do think Madigan is unique in that he's the last in the United States of the old-time political bosses. And he was the guy that held himself out as being smarter than everyone. I don't use cell phones. I don't use emails. And he got caught and convicted and is looking at significant jail time. So I think the message is out there. I think the feds give Zach Fart and some of these people that aren't even around anymore credit for starting all this. I think the message has been sent, but there is a lot of corruption because there's probably too much government here. There's too much money in government. So I don't think the problem has been solved, but this is probably the most significant prosecution in my lifetime.
So you don't know, though, if this will have any sort of deterrent effect on future politicians. No, seriously. I mean,
I agree.
That's
when you're taking cash in an envelope in a parking lot, you're pretty stupid. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that has necessarily gotten better.
The head of the FBI here in Chicago says they are still full gas on finding cases like this and snuffing them out.
Oh, yeah, and they have to be. We're the center of it. But I do think, again, I think this is the most significant prosecution in my lifetime, and I'm almost 90 this year. That's why I say it.
Pat Brady's skincare line coming up in our next commercial break. Pat will talk to you throughout the day.